News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Made in America.
Good afternoon, the beautiful state of North Carolina. This is Dr. Grace Vuoto, the editor of Politics and Culture at World Tribune, and you are listening to the first ever broadcast of American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I hope you take the time to join me every Saturday at 3:05 all the way to 4 o'clock. I want to thank Carl Lamb, who has given me this extraordinary opportunity to speak to the American people, unfiltered, unabashed. My commitment is to report the news of the day while I uphold all the values that you hold dear, the values that I hold dear. That is the values of limited government, the values of family, and most important of all, the values of faith. You will hear on this show stories that you don't necessarily hear anywhere else, or at least you will hear a perspective that is fresh and new. I will often be touting stories that I am writing for worldtribune.com, and I encourage all of you to sign up for the daily email alerts from worldtribune.com. There's some of the best reporting in America taking place right there on that website, and I'm honored to be a part of that site as well. Well, we have so much to discuss today, and I don't know what to say about the fact that on this very first broadcast of American Heartland, the President of the United States is immersed in scandal. Scandal, scandal, scandal. And today we're going to be talking about Benghazi, IRS. We will also be talking about the explosive story that I wrote on all the forensic evidence that has come forward, which illustrates that Obama's long-form birth certificate is a forgery. We will have Lieutenant Mike Zullo being interviewed. He is heading the cold case posse investigation that is taking the nation by storm. And we're also going to be discussing an extremely important story on declining fertility rates in America. Yes, we're going to talk candidly about sex. That is to say, the sex that is not taking place properly in this country to produce enough children. So I hope you stay tuned for all these reports. Now, let's get right to it. As many of you know, the president has been embroiled in a long-standing scandal on Benghazi, and currently there are several congressional investigations underway. When I do so much of my political analysis across this country, people always ask me, Dr. Grace, which of these scandals do you think is the most damning? Which do you think is the worst? And I say it is Benghazi, Benghazi, Benghazi. Do not take your eye off the ball of Benghazi. I think the president would love for us to change the conversation. I think he'd love for us to forget about Benghazi. I think he'd love for it to be tied up in committee. Well, I'm telling you something. I've got my eye on that scandal, and I'm not letting go. Because 4 Americans died there. Some of the other scandals are dreadful, but they're not as bad as 4 Americans, including an American ambassador, dead in an incident which could have and should have been prevented. In addition, why do I say keep your eyes on Benghazi? It is because in some of the other scandals, we may suspect that President Obama is involved. But will we actually be able to find that smoking gun that ties him right into an incident that is damning? It might be tough. I know there are lots of good folks on Capitol Hill working to try to make that happen, but in a lot of the other scandals, the Obama administration might be able to set up some scapegoats, and the president himself may go unscathed. But on Benghazi, it is really, really, really hard, because some of the unanswered questions are pointing right into the Oval Office. They are pointing right at President Obama himself as commander-in-chief during an incident in which an American outpost was under attack. Well, we have some explosive revelations now coming forward on Benghazi, and I want to address some of this with you today. You all have heard over and over again Hillary Clinton's very famous quote from her testimony in Benghazi. That's the quote that the mainstream media has played over and over again, where she basically says, what difference does it make how these Americans died? The point is to get to the bottom of the matter so that it never happens again. Well, you've heard that quote to death. But what I want to play today is some other more substantive statements that she made. And I want to then contrast that with all the information we know now. Brittany, roll that first clip on Hillary testifying on Benghazi.
Because as I have said many times since September 11th, I take responsibility, and nobody is more committed to getting this right. I am determined to leave the State Department and our country safer, stronger, and more secure. Now, taking responsibility meant not only moving quickly in those first uncertain hours and days to respond to the immediate crisis, but also to make sure we were protecting our people and posts in high-threat areas across the region and the world. It also meant launching an independent investigation to determine exactly what happened in Benghazi and to recommend steps for improvement. And it also meant intensifying our efforts to combat terrorism and support emerging democracies in North Africa and beyond. Let me share briefly the lessons we have learned up until now. First, let's start on the night of September 11th itself and those difficult early days. I directed our response from the State Department and stayed in close contact with officials from across our government and the Libyan government. So I did see firsthand what Ambassador Pickering and Chairman Mullen called timely and exceptional coordination. No delays in decision-making, no denials of support from Washington or from our military. And I want to echo the review board's praise for the valor and
Brittany, you can
courage
stop
of
that
our
right
people
there.
on the ground.
And you have just heard the former Secretary of State lying to the American people, because she said that there was no denial of support. There is so much evidence coming forward now indicating that, in fact, there were troops standing all around the region that could have helped. Fox News has an anonymous speaker, one who was a member of troops standing by, who revealed that there was so much assistance that could have gone forward. This is an anonymous special operator, and he exposes boldly the lie that the former secretary just stated. Go ahead, Brittany, roll that clip.
C-110 had the ability to be there, in my opinion, in 4 to 6 hours from their European theater to react.
They would have been there before the second attack.
They would have been there before the second attack. They would have been there at a minimum to provide a quick reaction force that could facilitate their exfil out of the problem situation. Nobody knew how it was going to develop. And you hear a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of advisors say, hey, we wouldn't have sent them there because, you know, the security was an unknown situation.
No one knew that.
If it's an unknown situation, at a minimum, you send forces there to facilitate the exfil or medical injuries.
This special operator has testified that there were troops standing nearby in Croatia that at a minimum could have gone to help in medical assistance. But we have so much testimony coming forward from other sources indicating that troops could have gone even to prevent more deaths from occurring on that very night. Recently, in a congressional testimony, there was a request to have some of the folks that were on the ground to be interviewed. And the Pentagon has said to the press that one individual simply can't be found. His name is Colonel George Bristol. And the Pentagon said, by the way, this individual he held a key position in the chain of command in the U.S. African Command. And the Pentagon has said that he won't be able to testify because he is retired and they, quote, cannot compel retired members to testify before Congress. That is the kind of stonewalling that is occurring. But regardless of that, there is drip, 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 drip information that is coming forward in every direction. A new book has been written, and that book is written by security agents on the ground. It is soon to come out. It is called Under Fire, The Untold Story of the Attack in Benghazi. And these eyewitnesses also are exposing so many of the lies that have been stated to us. One of the things that this book reveals is that there is no way that this was in any way a spontaneous eruption. Let me quote you a passage. Quote, "They were not members of a ragtag force, split into small groups which advanced throughout the compound methodically. They employed military-style hand signals to direct their progression towards their objectives." End of quote. And there is so much of this detail that is coming forward that illustrates that those who attacked the compound did so with very precise advanced planning and very precise knowledge of who they were targeting and what they were trying to achieve. The story that is emerging from Benghazi is clear. A massive cover-up has taken place, and the key cover-up is this. Who gave the order to stand down? There were troops that could have rescued those in distress. Somebody gave the order to stand down, and that is why they are trying to blackball any further testimony from those in the chain of command. And that is why also this scandal potentially can bring down the president. Because if we can definitively identify that it was the president who said to the nearby troops, "Do not go to the aid of those in need," that is dereliction of duty. That is unforgivable. That is a crime that I do not think the American people will leave unpunished. And that's why I urge all of you to keep your eye on Benghazi. We know for a fact that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in her testimony, she said she spoke to the president at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And shortly after that, those infamous talking points emerged on the State Department website where they were trying to blame an anti-Muslim video. So we do know that the president was engaged that night. What we need to find out for sure, did he give the order to leave those men to die? There is another scandal that is embroiling the administration, and that is the IRS. And recently, the acting commissioner, Daniel Werfel, was asked to testify, and he underwent withering scrutiny. I've got to tell you, I don't want to be in his shoes. It was Paul Ryan and Representative Peter Roskam, both Republicans, who subjected this man to intense and battering scrutiny. And I do not think that Acting Commissioner Daniel Werfel is up to the job. He presented a report to Congress that is basically a whitewash of what has taken place. And the congressmen who were interviewing him really took him to task. Here's a sample of that. Brittany, can you please roll that clip of Representative Paul Ryan attacking Daniel Werfel?
Mr. Werfel, Secretary Lew asked you to put this report together to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. I look at page 35, and I see basically a case made for a budget increase. Your budget asked for over $1 billion in more spending for your agency, and you're asking us to hire another 4,572 employees. Let me read you what we've already learned in just 2 months. In just 2 months, we've got a conference in Atlanta which had a celebrity chef Wolfgang Puck cater, costing $2.4 million. We've got a conference in Anaheim, California, $4.1 million. A conference in Philadelphia, $2.9 million. A conference in San Diego, $4.1 million.
And the representative goes on and on and on. And basically he shows that there has been so much abuse of public funds. And this acting commissioner is asking for $1 billion more from the American people. That is what is in his report. It is shameful. There is a cover-up going on regarding Benghazi. There is waste and abuse with the IRS. No end in sight to coming to the bottom of it. And boy, are we sorry that Obama is in for a second term.
I didn't know.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I am your host on WTSB. This segment, we're going to discuss the toxic story of Obama's birth certificate, the certificate that we now know has been forged. Before we do that, I want to take a couple of calls, and I know that I have my good buddy Tom Warren on the line. Tom, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Tom. Great to talk to you.
Hello.
You're calling us from Florida, that's correct?
Yes, this is Dr. Grace, correct?
That is she.
Oh, Dr. Grace.
You're on the air, Tom.
Oh, very nice. Yes, I am here in Florida, and it's a pleasure to speak to you. I want to congratulate you on your new show, American Heartland, with Dr. Grace on WTSB.
Thank you very much, Tom. We've been talking about Benghazi and how poorly protected it was, how there were troops nearby that could have rescued those in distress. I know you had a long history in the Foreign Service. What are your thoughts on the Benghazi controversy?
Yes, Dr. Grace. I did serve in the U.S. Foreign Service. I was posted to embassies in Europe and Africa, and also in South Asia, and it's a very confusing situation. In fact, your listeners can go to the State Department website under the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and there are various publications now available concerning the attacks on U.S. diplomatic facilities, and there's very little being said about Benghazi.
That is unbelievable, especially since we had the former Secretary of State saying they were going to get to the bottom of it. They were going to make sure something like this never happens again. We know that they have been very slipshotty in their investigation. We know, for example, the FBI didn't even go on site for 2 whole weeks. And everybody knows that evidence runs cold in that amount of time. Well, thank you very much, Tom, for that insight. Ken Kaplan from Atlanta. Ken, are you there?
Yeah, I wanted to just chime in with the list of scandals. I'm just thinking about this, and I researched a little bit. There's over 300 scandals. They have best of scandal lists. They have top 20, top 50. It's scandalous how many scandals Obama and his administration is involved in. I mean, it's just taking me by, it's overwhelming me.
It is, and you're quite right. Lots of people feel overwhelmed. Look, I've been analyzing the political scene for years, and I can tell you when you had these succession of scandals breaking out, I felt overwhelmed. And this is what I've been doing for years professionally. It is overwhelming, and more than overwhelming, it's extremely disturbing. I think a lot of the American people are beginning to sadly tune out precisely because it's overwhelming, it's depressing, and some of it is just plain confusing. And that's what the Obama administration wants. One of the tactics in Washington is to just overwhelm people and get them to be apathetic, because the less they know, the less they understand, the more easily they'll be bamboozled. And one of the tactics, too, is to just draw out an investigation. Just let it take a long time, because memories will fade, passions will cool, and they will get away with what it is that they want to get away with. So you are quite right, Ken, and it is our job, especially here in American Heartland, we're going to keep holding this president and his party accountable for each and every one of these scandals. We will not forget, and we're especially not going to forget the victims of his dereliction of duty in Benghazi.
It's unbelievable. It's like all these distractions. In the meantime, he's just like rubbing his hands and smiling, thinking that, we got our eye off the ball, and he's going to go on and, make it to a situation where we're going to have really not a democracy, a republic anymore. And I think most people realize that. They realize that he knows legally he's going to become, like, you can call it anything you want, but it's going to be a one-party system. I hate to say dictatorship because it's not going to be about big death camps like it was in Nazi Germany, but it's going to be a one-rule system eventually because he's going to import all these illegals, and they're just going to would never have another fair vote again, election.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for that call. Thank you for those insights. I certainly oppose the immigration bill. I think that's another thing we have to stop. It is an attempt to empower the Democrats for years to come. And you're quite right. There is an attempt to truly entrench the Democrats permanently, nationally, as they have done in some states, like Massachusetts, for example. So it certainly will be our job to try to prevent that from happening. Thank you, Ken, for that call. One of the scandals, though, that I don't think he'll quite be able to escape from so easily is the one that is currently breaking, the one that I wrote a piece on. It has currently been published on worldtribune.com. It is called Forensic Findings on Obama's Birth Certificate. It is exploding all over the internet because I am simply reporting what the cold case posse led by Lieutenant Mike Zullo has uncovered. The long-form birth certificate that Obama presented to the public is a forgery. There is no doubt about that. This is based on extensive forensic analysis that Lieutenant Zullo has conducted. He hired Reed Hayes, who is a very reputable expert based out of Honolulu. He is also a Democrat, somebody who certainly doesn't have an axe to grind. And upon looking at the certificate, Reed Hayes was shocked. He compiled a 40-page report, which is now an affidavit, which means it is a sworn legal document subject to him being hauled off on perjury charges if it is a lie. And Reed Hayes says this is a 100% forgery. Lieutenant Zullo has compiled so much evidence. He has a 300-page document that he's produced. It's about to balloon to 400 pages with national experts all testifying to the same thing. This is clearly a document that was manufactured. It appears to be a 9-layer PDF document. If I took a photocopy of your birth certificate or mine, it would just be a 1-layer document. There's no way it could be 9 layers. And yet we now have evidence beyond the shadow of a doubt that the long-form birth certificate that the president presented to the public is a 9-layer document, and it has moving parts on it. There is a stamp on it that can be moved. There is a date stamp that can be moved. These stamps that can be moved essentially mean that the document is forged. I encourage all of you to go to worldtribune.com, read the piece that I wrote, and also look at the YouTube video that Lieutenant Zullo put together. And that YouTube video shows you piece by piece by piece all of the forensic evidence that is now being compiled as part of a criminal investigation. There are lots of folks out there that are going to try to shut this down. They're using words like birther and kook. Well, what I say to them is this. We looked at Senator John McCain's record extensively when he was running for the highest office in the land. The Senate asked questions. Was he eligible? Where was he born? Does he have the right documentation? And yet, for President Barack Obama, the same inquiry was not conducted. And when questions are asked, all that his supporters can do is smear and smear and smear. But the American people are on to him, and they smell a fishy story. And that's why they kept asking questions about that short form birth certificate that he had presented in 2008. And finally, in 2011, he capitulated because the public was asking questions. And the form that he put forward in 2011, many people, upon looking at it, had doubts. I don't know, something just doesn't look right about this, especially since he had spent years fending off legal inquiry. He had used money. He had used a law firm to try to prevent further scrutiny. And suddenly this long-form birth certificate came on the scene. And it seemed to have quieted things down for a while. Yet Lieutenant Mike Zullo and the cold case posse in Arizona came to look at the document based on a request by 250 citizens of Arizona who said, you know what, we don't believe this is authentic. And to his shock, to his horror, he has concluded the same thing. And he is about to present that report to Congress. And I ask all of you to follow this story very, very carefully, as this might be the biggest fraud in American history. Stay tuned next for that exclusive interview with Lieutenant Mike Zullo on American Heartland with Dr. Grace on WTSB.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. You are hearing a song that I chose for this segment. It really is the sensation that I felt when I was reviewing all the evidence. I really felt sick. I cannot believe that this is happening to this beautiful republic. I had heard about the scandal circulating the birth certificate, but I couldn't quite believe my eyes when I began to explore the evidence. One of the things that I write in the article that you will find on worldtribune.com is that many of us who are concerned about this birth certificate issue would rather be wrong than right. Because if this certificate is a fake, which we know that it is, so I should not even say if this actually goes to a congressional hearing, and this becomes a leading story in the minds of the American public, we will be embroiled in a constitutional crisis. Unpacking all of this for us right here today is the man who has spearheaded this investigation, the man who knows all the evidence like the back of his hand. I call him an American hero, Lieutenant Mike Zullo. Welcome, Lieutenant Zullo.
How are you?
I'm well. Tell us about your credentials first and foremost. I think a lot of Americans who hear this story for the first time are very skeptical. And obviously they want to know, what are the credentials of the folks that are doing this investigation, and do they have a specific axe to grind?
Okay, well, on the axe to grind, I can tell you no. The credentials are, I'm a former police officer as a detective in the state of New Jersey. I was trained in homicide investigation, fingerprint identification, domestic violence investigation, narcotics trafficking. I have been a licensed investigator in the state of New Jersey. Coming out here in Arizona, I joined Sheriff Arpaio's posse, and ultimately in 2007, I was asked by Sheriff Arpaio if I would head up a cold case unit for him. Primary goal was to assist in cold case investigations with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. I subsequently been trained in MCSO, MCSO acronym for Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, AZ Post-Certified Homicide Investigation, Cold Case Investigation. I had training in fugitive detection and apprehension, high-risk criminal behavior. And going forward, right now, currently, I am chief investigator for Sheriff Joe Arpaio into the eligibility issue of Barack Obama's long-form birth certificate and ultimately his eligibility to be president of the United States.
Right. And what a resume that is. That is extremely impressive. And I think what the American people need to understand is that this is now a criminal investigation being undertaken by a person who has law enforcement authority. You represent Sheriff Arpaio in this investigation. So this is not just another pundit talking. This is not just another radio talk show host. This is an officer of the law that stands before us and is telling us that he has uncovered damning evidence that the certificate is a forgery. Lieutenant Zullo, can you explain to the American people what exactly you have found that convinces you 100% that this is a forged document?
Well, we believe after a 21-month investigation, we are firmly of the belief that the long-form birth certificate presented to the public in a PDF form never started out as an original paper document. It's not a copy of an original paper document. It is a document that has been created exclusively inside a computer. It was fabricated manually by human intervention, put together in layers to give the appearance of an official birth certificate. But the fact of the matter is, after putting this PDF file through 1,200 forensic tests, we discovered that every layer on this document was put together by hand in a cut and paste piecemeal method to give the impression to the unsuspecting public that this is in fact a true representation of the president's birth certificate. And after coming to this conclusion, we took that document, we took our findings, and we submitted them for review to a certified forensic document examiner. This is someone who's recognized as an expert in numerous court and trial proceedings. He did his review, and his conclusion after giving me a 40-page document was that the document is 100% fabricated in his opinion.
Right.
Now,
and do you think that there's any way that his testimony, you're talking about Reed Hayes, you think that his testimony can be discredited in any way by those who seek to say that all of this is a political witch hunt of some kind?
No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, Reed Hayes resides in Hawaii. Reed Hayes is a Democrat. Reed Hayes voted for Mr. Obama. Reed Hayes has testified in numerous cases for the state of Hawaii. And as fate would have it, Reed Hayes also did work and testified on behalf of Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie is the law firm that represents Mr. Obama in every one of these eligibility challenges that have been going on around the country. So it's going to be very difficult to impeach Mr. Hayes because Perkins Coie relied on him as an expert in courtroom testimony in previous cases. So it's going to pose a very big problem for this administration and for the law firm that they use representing the president in these kinds of matters.
Right. I was really most impressed by that. And his report to you is a sworn affidavit, meaning that if he has lied in any way, that would be subject to charges of perjury. Is that not correct?
That's correct. He gave me a sworn affidavit attesting to the material in it. He did his own independent research, his own independent study. And, we really just put it out there. This is not a political witch hunt. We put it out there. This is our methodology. This is what we did. Do you concur? And, in fact, he did. And he was astonished when he looked at that document. And he looked at that document. Originally, he was reluctant, didn't really want to do this. And I asked him just to take a cursory look at it. And after I sent him the PDF file, he calls me back and he goes, there's something wrong with this. And I explained to him that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. And it took him about 2 to 3 weeks, if my memory serves me. And he forwarded us a 40-page report coming to that conclusion. I mean, that conclusion is devastating.
It is absolutely devastating, especially since, as you said, he has worked for Perkins Coie. So his credentials are impeccable, and you have others that have impeccable credentials, those who did the 1,200 computer forensic analysis, right?
We do. These people have been in computer science since, I believe, 1978. They have done work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And, our goal in this was not to find this document null and void. Actually, we thought we were going to clear this document. We thought, the sheriff thought, that this was going to be a 48-hour matter, and this thing would be okay. We would announce it to the world that it was fine and just move the country beyond this issue. But unfortunately, about 24 hours into it, it was apparent that we had some problems. These individuals that did the testing for us, one side of that equation was there to prove what we did. The other side, unbeknownst to the one professional who was trying to prove it, actually tried to debunk us or disprove what we said. And his was more important to me because at the end, he had to conclude he could not disprove our work, and he had to come to the conclusion it is, in fact, a manipulated document.
Yeah, this is absolutely shocking. I think every American out there who hears that just cannot believe what they are hearing. Now, I understand, Lieutenant Zullo, that you have recently gone to Capitol Hill. You're just back from a trip to Washington, D.C. You're trying to bring all of this evidence forward to our congressmen and women up there, right?
We're doing that. Sheriff Arpaio thinks that Congress really needs to look into this matter. It is really incumbent upon them, he believes constitutionally, to make an inquiry about this. And right now we are desperately trying to do that. And we do have interest. We have interest from a Texas Republican. His name is Steve Stockman. Congressman Stockman has expressed interest in this, and I am trying to arrange a meeting. I'm not clear yet whether I'm going back to see him or he's going to come out to Phoenix. But he is that interested that he's going to make the time, set it aside. He wants to be completely briefed by me as to what we have, and he wants to see all that evidence laid out before him.
Absolutely astonishing. And I think, Lieutenant Zullo, lots of Americans want to know, what can they do to help you bring this forward to Congress?
You know, at this time, Joyce, what I'm going to say kind of rattles people. I'm going to ask people to kind of, hang on a little bit. Don't do anything yet. If we're successful in going the way we're going, if we're successful in getting this where we need to be, there'll be ample time to take measures to, for lack of a better word, push your representatives. But we don't want to start to do that right now. Right now, what we have to focus on is getting this before Congress. Once we get it before Congress, then we can do something with a grassroots movement to try to compel them to at least look at this information. That's the critical thing, Doctor. We have to get people to look at this information.
And that's what we're doing with that article in World Tribune. Have you had anybody come forward that has presented any evidence that can credibly contest what you have done, even based on the wide publicity we've now given this story?
No. I've put that challenge out there for the last 21 months. If you can come to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and show me how somebody's scanning in a one-dimensional document with a one-button push on a scanner, scan it into a computer, and show me where it recreates 26 anomalies found in the Obama document, I would declare to the world that we were wrong. It's going to be impossible. You may play with computer programs and get them to replicate some of these things, but you can't do it in its entirety. And that's what's going to be compelling about it. It's impossible. It was done by human intervention. A computer cannot do this on its own.
And now, what I think that the folks out there need to understand is that you are not making any claims whatsoever about where the president was born or not born. I mean, we understand there seems to be some kind of document in the archives in Hawaii. The only thing you're saying is that this particular document that the president revealed is a fake.
That's correct. You think about it, the American people should be able to see this kind of document. Once it's offered by the President of the United States, they should be able to see the original. This is not an original of anything. It is not a copy of an original. The only thing that's original, it's an original forgery. That's all it is.
And a bad forgery, from what you and all your experts have said. Apparently the experts who have looked at it say that they can come to the conclusion that it's a bad forgery pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when this was first released by the White House, on the White House website, it was released, I believe, within 20 minutes. Graphic artists were saying there was something wrong with this. Those are just people out there downloaded this onto their computer, and all of a sudden they started to find things wrong with it. So whoever did this, my theory, and this is only a theory, that this document, this file, once it was uploaded, was actually uploaded in error. I believe this was a working file that they did not flatten, is a word that's used where you kind of condense all these layers together and they can no longer be taken apart. I believe that this was done in error. And in that haste, by 20 minutes after it was launched, I believe the number is around 130,000 people had downloaded that file to their computers. So there was no taking it back.
Wow.
They had to live with this.
Wow, wow, wow. And now you're right. They're going to have to live with it, and they're going to have to live with the consequences of having presented a fraudulent document to the American people. Well, Lieutenant Zullo, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. But more than that, thank you for your hard work and your courage and your skill and your tenacity in a very, very difficult criminal investigation. God bless you.
Well, thank you, Doctor, and congratulations on your new show.
Thank you very much. Well, you heard it right from the horse's mouth. This is not Dr. Grace saying it. This is an officer of the law, and he is telling the American people the president has presented a forgery to all of us. Guess what? We're being lied to. His credibility continues to sink like a stone. You're listening to Dr. Grace on American Heartland on WTSB.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Before we get to America's declining fertility rate, I'm sure most of you have heard that MSNBC's ratings are in extremely sharp decline. That station, which bills itself as the quote-unquote place for politics, has been dropping very badly in the ratings ever since the president was elected. And they have slipped now to third place behind CNN. CNN has gotten back into the fray because they have been covering stories like the Jodi Arias trial, and they've been all over the Zimmerman trial. And the folks at MSNBC were scratching their heads. They're saying, I don't understand. Why are our ratings slipping? And I can tell you very clearly why. That station became nothing other than a mouthpiece for the White House talking points. And one of the things that they weren't doing at all is reporting the news. You know, in my assessment, in all my assessments and analysis, I really try to be fair and balanced. So I tried to listen to Rachel Maddow's show, and I tried to listen to Hardball with Chris Matthews. And after a while, I got very frustrated, not simply because there's a liberal point of view that's being presented, because I expected that, and I actually wanted to listen to the liberal point of view so that I could rebut it. But what was most disturbing is I noticed that they weren't even reporting the key news. And one of the things you'll notice with the mainstream media, it's not just that reports are biased, that they clearly have a liberal slant, or that the White House is, they're repeating the White House talking points. It's their story selection. And the problem with MSNBC, and the reason their ratings were declining so fast, is they were not even reporting what everybody else was concerned about, whether that be news about a hot trial, an interesting trial, or whether that be key scandals like the ones that I just discussed today, Benghazi, IRS, the certificate. This is all the stuff that the people want to hear about. And they were simply not reporting that. And as a result, their ratings are declining. You know, there's a fascinating article by the National Journal on this. And one of the lines that they have is, from 8 to 11 p.m., quote, the program was too erudite, too sophisticated, and too earnest to hook a wide swath of viewers. Excuse me. It was not at all too sophisticated. It was not at all too earnest. It was flat out boring, and often it was nothing other than propaganda that the American people can see right through. You know, one of the interesting stories in all this is you all remember Keith Olbermann. He had a show that was actually the linchpin of MSNBC's programming. He was ousted, and the network has pretty much gone downhill from there. Keith Olbermann was a vicious critic of George W. Bush. And what is ironic is that Olbermann ended up leaving MSNBC, and guess what he's doing now? Is he opining somewhere? You know, he was so hot-blooded, so passionate, so self-righteous. Guess what Olbermann is doing now? He has become a post-season baseball anchor for TBS. And that says it all. He basically had convictions that were skin deep, as you can see, because he didn't pursue his craft in journalism and just went wherever the money apparently is right now. So MSNBC is in a free fall, and that is at least a kernel of good news for the American people, that shoddy station is going right down the toilet. But some bad news, some very bad news, and this is another story that I thought should be discussed coast to coast, should be discussed constantly, should be discussed in every American living room, at every American kitchen table. The national birth rate hits an all-time low. We now know that the birth rate in 2011 and 2012 is lower than it has ever been in American history. Some of the publications that are covering this story, they're just saying that this is due to the fact that we're in a recession, that this is due to the fact that we're out of a recession technically, but it doesn't feel like that. They're basically saying that the economic recovery is too slow, that it's a financial issue with so many people, that's one of the reasons that kids are so expensive, especially trying to plan for their college education, etc., and that's the major reason that people are not reproducing in America. The statistics are absolutely harrowing. Currently, out of every 1,000 women that are in the period that they can, possibly give birth, from, let's say, the age of 15 to 44, out of every 1,000 women, there are only 63 births. And that is according to the Center for Disease Control. That is absolutely shocking. And there's a fascinating YouTube clip that shows just how dangerous the declining fertility rates both in America and in Europe are. Brittany, can you roll clip 1, please?
According to research, in order for a culture to maintain itself for more than 25 years, there must be a fertility rate of 2.11 children per family. With anything less, the culture will decline. Historically, no culture has ever reversed a 1.9 fertility rate. A rate of 1.3, impossible to reverse, because it would take 80 to 100 years to correct itself, and there is no economic model that can sustain a culture during that time. In other words, if 2 sets of parents each have 1 child, there are half as many children as parents. If those children have 1 child, then there are 1/4 as many grandchildren as grandparents. If only 1 million babies are born in 2006, it's hard to have 2 million adults enter the workforce.
Thank you very much, Brittany. Well, you heard those harrowing statistics. Do you know, if I was a general trying to target the United States, if I was the enemy of this country and I was trying to figure out a way to destroy the country, I would say all you have to do is convince young women across the country not to give birth. And eventually, you will destroy that nation. Unfortunately for the United States of America, others are not as poor in their performance when it comes to breeding babies. Muslims, for example, are exploding. There's a population growth amongst Muslims that is quickly overtaking Europe, and which eventually can threaten even the status, say, of the Catholic Church as the world's largest religious denomination. Brittany, can you roll the second clip, please?
In the United States, the current fertility rate of American citizens is 1.6. With the influx of the Latino nations, the rate increases to 2.11, the bare minimum required to sustain a culture. In 1970, there were 100,000 Muslims in America. Today, there are over 9 million. The world is changing. It's time to wake up.
You know, America, it really is time to wake up. One of the articles that discusses this story does point out that the birth rates, the desire to have birth, does not actually decline for older women in their early 40s, and the birth rate has actually remained the same for women in their 30s. So what is really going on in this country? Young women are being told, don't have children, get a career, get an education, children will tie you down. But in reality, most women who enter their 30s and their 40s, they desire children. One of the great ironies of the sex education that is so rampant across America, there is so much sex education, but what are our young women and men being taught to do in this sex education? They're being taught to do the most unnatural thing of all: have sex in a way that you don't procreate. Have sex in a way that you, a woman, never fulfill your calling as a woman to be a mom. The great tragedy is that so many women nowadays delay childbearing to the point that when they desire to have children in their 30s and 40s, to their shock and their horror, they're not as fertile as they once were. And you have a whole other industry that is rising up against, to serve women in their 30s and 40s who suddenly discover that they desperately want children and then they cannot. One of the things I would suggest when we discuss sex education in our schools is let's stop talking merely about contraception. I think that is a very low-grade form of discussion altogether. Why don't we talk to young men and women about their long-term aspirations? Do they truly want eventually to have a family? What are the consequences of delaying childbirth? What are the individual consequences for women? Is it likely that they're going to be just as fertile as they want to be in their 30s? Remember, there's a second epidemic too. There are women who have one child and then they're not fertile enough for a sibling or a third child that they desire. All of this is never being discussed, and a larger issue is completely being ignored. What are the national implications of a society that is slowly destroying itself? That's what it ultimately means. It basically means that we are too lazy and too stupid in this country to keep up a population that sustains the greatest power in the history of the world. Like I said, if I was an enemy general, I would say, you want to defeat the United States? Keep peddling this contraceptive mentality. Keep teaching young girls to delay childbirth, and the enemies of the United States will win because we will simply outpopulate them. Thank you so much for listening today to this broadcast. I want to close with a small personal note. I would like to close every show with a small personal note. One of the things that I discovered and learned in my long years working at Washington, D.C. is to proceed in one's career in the very same way that you proceed in your personal life. I'd like to share that I think in my 30s, I made a mistake because I bought the so-called professional language. When I looked for a job, I asked questions like, what is the salary? What are the terms? What are the benefits? What are the working hours? But I didn't ask the key question, and I found myself often very dissatisfied. One night, my husband and I had a chat, and we were talking about lots of the seedy characters that we had met in our many years in Washington, D.C., and why it was that professionally we often felt stunted. And I turned to him and I said, you know why? Because in our personal life, we are using a set of criteria, a set of values to make judgments. It's a set of criteria and values that we're not using in our professional life. For example, when my husband and I found each other, we assessed each other's character first and foremost. We inquired whether or not we were people of faith. We asked questions like, is that person honest? When we have relations with our family members, we do the same thing. We base our judgments on their character. When we achieve friends, we assess, is that person telling the truth? Are they honest? Do they have integrity? And when we make judgments based on character, ultimately we're successful in our relationships. And so a light bulb went off in my head. I decided that professionally what I was going to do was two things. Number one, not ask, what can a job do for me, but how can I serve? And number 2, only work with people of outstanding character. And that is what I have done with World Tribune, whose publisher I sincerely and deeply admire, and now with Carl Lamb on WTSB, who have given me this amazing opportunity to have my very first show. Thank you all for listening. God bless you. God bless this beautiful country. Please tune in every week on Saturday at 3 o'clock. This is Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, upholding values that never die.
Where the stars and stripes and the